This is the I-7 portion of the IEP document. This refers to participation in statewide assessments. The first section of this document asks you if your student will be in a grade when they will be taking the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concepts examination. Please keep in mind when answering this question that the IEP year is different than the academic year. You'll want to consider whether or not your student will be taking the WKCE within their IEP year. So for example, if you have a student who's currently in 2nd grade but will be in 3rd grade during the IEP year and will be taking the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concepts examination, you will mark this box. If your student will not be in a grade in which they will be taking the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concepts examination during the IEP year, you will check this box. This next section asks you if your student will be taking the WKCE or if they will be participating in the alternative assessment. You will mark the box accordingly. If your student is going to be participating in the alternative assessment, please make sure that you have completed the alternative assessment checklist and attach that to the IEP. The next section we're going to discuss is the Accommodations for Students with a Disability section. Please note that all accommodations documented within this section of the IEP must be in direct alignment with your daily practices for assessment with that student. In other words, you cannot provide the student with extended time on the WKCE if they do not have that same accommodation for their daily assessment experiences. Also, it's important to note in this section that you're documenting not only the accommodations that you'll be using from the accommodations matrix, you'll also want to document all allowable test practices for all students. What I mean by that is general education students without an IEP can take the WKCE in a small group setting. If you are doing that with your student with special needs, you will need to make sure that you document that in this section of the WKCE, in this section of the I-7, even though it's an allowable test practice for all students. Make sure that the accommodations that you are providing to your student actually enhance their access to the test. The goal of the accommodations is to ensure that your student is able to demonstrate their accurate abilities and knowledge. When you're documenting the accommodations, please make sure that you are using the most recent assessment accommodations matrix to document the accommodations being offered. And feel free to copy and paste right off of that assessment matrix into this section of the IEP document. That will ensure that we're using appropriate language and documenting accurately the assessment being or the accommodation being provided. One other thing that is important to note is if you're looking at the assessment matrix and you notice that an accommodation that your student receives on a daily basis for other assessments is not documented on that matrix, there is a form that you can fill out and submit to DPI requesting that your student is able to have that accommodation provided to them when taking the WKCE. And then what you'll need to do is just wait for approval from the Department of Public Instruction as to whether or not that is a reasonable accommodation for the WKCE. So just because it doesn't show up on the assessment matrix that changes annually does not mean that you cannot provide that to your student. You just need to ask permission. Okay, so going on down here, this section discusses the district-wide assessments that your student might be given. Please make sure that you are checking with your regular education peers to find out what assessments your student will be taking within their IEP year. Again, not the academic year, but the full course of the IEP year. Those assessments will be documented here. Another resource that is available to you are the assessment timelines, which you will find in the folder that you have in front of you. So if your student is in a grade in which they will participate in district-wide assessments, you're going to want to check this box. Please note that every single student in our district takes a district-wide assessment with the exception of your seniors. However, as noted here, that will be changing shortly because as we move to the universal screeners for RTI, we will be assessing students at all grade levels. The PALS assessment is the new assessment this year for 4K and kindergarten students. So please note that one as you document those assessments coming up. So it asks you then to go on and list any appropriate testing accommodations for those district-wide assessments. Again, we want to be really certain that we're documenting all the accommodations that the student needs day to day, and that those accommodations are consistent and aligned with those ones that you put up here in the boxes above for the WKCE assessment. If your student is not going to be participating in district-wide assessments because you're going to give them alternative assessments, you need to make note of that here. If your student is a student who is participating in alternative assessments in the district-wide assessments, the team is going to want to consider whether or not the student should be participating in the alternative assessment for the statewide assessment, which is the WKCE currently. Please be certain again, if you determine that the student is going to participate in alternative assessments, that you attach the WAA participation checklist. Thank you.